They replaced my seat at my own son's wedding with a trash can wrapped in white satin ribbons, and when I looked at my daughter-in-law in shock, she just laughed and said, "It's only a joke, Evelyn. Don't be so dramatic." I stood there at the entrance of the ballroom with my hand still resting on the gold handle of the reception doors, trying to understand what I was looking at. The Crystal Pines Country Club looked exactly the way Claire had dreamed it would. White roses covered every table. Tall candles flickered beneath crystal chandeliers. A string quartet played softly near the dance floor, while waiters carried silver trays filled with champagne flutes. Everything was elegant, expensive, perfect. And directly beside table 7, where my family was seated, there was a polished silver trash can with a white place card taped to the lid. Evelyn Whitmore. For a moment, I honestly thought someone had made a mistake. Maybe the wedding planner was still rearranging tables. Maybe one of the groomsmen had moved something by accident. But then I saw Claire watching me from across the ballroom. She stood near the sweetheart table in her fitted ivory gown, one hand resting possessively on Ryan's arm. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't confused. She was smiling. "Do you like it?" she asked loudly enough for several nearby guests to hear. A few people turned toward me immediately. I could feel their eyes moving from my face to the trash can and back again. My throat tightened, but I kept my expression calm. "I'm sorry," I asked quietly. Claire laughed, waving one manicured hand dismissively. "Oh, relax, Evelyn. It's just a joke. Ryan said you're always complaining about table arrangements at family events, so we thought this would be funny." A few people chuckled awkwardly. Not because it was funny, because they didn't know what else to do. I looked at my son then. Ryan wouldn't meet my eyes at first. He adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo and gave a small shrug, the same shrug he used as a teenager whenever he wanted to avoid responsibility for something. "Mom, don't take it so seriously," he muttered. Claire spent months planning this wedding. I stared at him for a long second. This was the same little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms because he was afraid of loud noises. The same child who once cried for an hour after accidentally stepping on a bird in our backyard. I remembered sewing Halloween costumes at 2 in the morning because he wanted to be an astronaut instead of a pirate at the last minute. I remembered working double shifts at the accounting office after his father died so Ryan could still attend the private college he loved. And now he couldn't even look me in the eye while his wife humiliated me in front of 200 guests. "Of course," I said softly. "I wouldn't want to ruin the evening." Claire's smile widened with satisfaction, like she had won something important. "See," she said brightly to the bridesmaids standing nearby. "I told you Evelyn would calm down." Calm down. As if I had caused a scene. As if humiliation was something graceful women were expected to absorb quietly for the comfort of others. I removed my coat slowly and folded it over the back of the empty chair beside the trash can. No one offered to move it. No one offered me another seat. Across the room, I noticed Ryan's college friends whispering to each other while glancing in my direction. One woman covered her mouth to hide a laugh. Another looked away quickly when she realized I had seen her staring. The band continued playing. Glasses clinked. People smiled for photographs beneath enormous flower arrangements I had partially paid for. I sat down carefully beside the trash can and smoothed the wrinkles from my navy blue dress. My hands trembled once before becoming still again. Claire leaned toward Ryan and whispered something into his ear that made him laugh under his breath. Then she looked directly at me and raised her champagne glass slightly, almost like a private toast. That was the moment something inside me finally went quiet. Not broken, not shattered, just quiet. Because sitting there beside that silver trash can, surrounded by people pretending not to notice what was happening, I realized something I should have understood years ago. Claire didn't want me embarrassed for one evening. She wanted me erased. From the family completely. And my son was willing to help her do it. The reception continued as if nothing unusual had happened. That was the strangest part of all. The pianist near the dance floor moved smoothly from one romantic song to another while waiters refilled champagne glasses and carried tiny crab cakes across the ballroom. Guests laughed beneath warm golden lights. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead like nothing ugly could possibly exist beneath them. And there I sat beside a silver trash can wrapped in white satin ribbon while my own son danced with his bride 10 feet away. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap because I knew if I touched my wine glass too tightly, people would notice my fingers shaking again. Across the room, Claire's mother smiled proudly at guests while showing off wedding photographs on her phone. Her family looked perfectly comfortable. Not one of them seemed embarrassed by what had happened to me. If anything, they looked entertained. Ryan and Claire moved slowly across the dance floor during their first dance, while dozens of guests lifted phones to record the moment. Claire rested her head against my son's shoulder with the satisfied expression of a woman who believed she had finally secured everything she wanted. Ryan looked relaxed too, happy even. Watching him laugh softly at something Claire whispered into his ear made a painful memory surface before I could stop it. 23 years earlier, Ryan had stood in our kitchen at age 12 crying because a group of boys at school had mocked an older cafeteria worker for her weight. Why would people humiliate someone like that? He had asked me while tears filled his eyes. It is cruel. Back then, kindness came naturally to him. Or maybe I only believed it did because I was his mother. I looked down at the white place card taped to the trash can lid. The edges had already started curling slightly from condensation. Someone had spent time making this, planning it, printing it, carrying it into the ballroom. And somehow, during all those steps, nobody thought to stop and say maybe humiliating the groom's widowed mother at his wedding was not funny after all. A young waitress approached carefully with a tray of champagne. She could not have been older than 19. "Would you like another glass, ma'am?" she asked quietly. I noticed the way her eyes flickered briefly toward the trash can before quickly looking away again. There was pity in her face. Real pity. Oddly enough, that hurt more than Claire's cruelty. "No thank you," I replied gently. "I am fine." But I was not fine. I was beginning to understand something much worse than simple disrespect. This had not started tonight. Tonight was only the first time Claire had become bold enough to humiliate me publicly. The truth was she had been slowly removing me from Ryan's life for years, one small moment at a time. First it was canceled Sunday dinners because they were both too busy. Then holiday visits became shorter. Phone calls became rare. Claire always had an explanation ready. Ryan was stressed from work. They needed private time as a couple. Young families needed boundaries. At first I believed her because I wanted peace. Then came the photographs where I somehow never appeared. Thanksgiving dinners I heard about afterward through social media. Family vacations I was informed about only after the plane had already landed somewhere tropical. Every exclusion came wrapped in politeness. Every insult arrived disguised as practicality. And every time I looked confused or hurt, Ryan would sigh and tell me I was imagining things. "Mom, Claire is trying her best," he would say. "You take everything personally." I remember one Christmas Eve 3 years earlier when I drove 40 minutes through freezing rain carrying homemade pecan pie and wrapped presents for everyone, only to find the house dark and empty because Claire had suddenly decided they should spend the holiday at a ski resort in Colorado instead. Ryan had forgotten to call me. Forgotten. That was the word he used. But sitting in that ballroom beside a decorated trash can, I finally saw the pattern clearly. Forgetting does not happen over and over in exactly the same direction. Forgetting does not erase only one person from every family memory. Claire was not pushing me away because of one disagreement or misunderstanding. She wanted my place inside the family. And slowly, carefully, she had convinced Ryan to hand it to her. Dinner was served shortly after the speeches began, though I barely touched the salmon placed carefully in front of me. Around me, silverware clinked against china plates while conversations rose and fell in soft, polished waves. The ballroom smelled faintly of roses, butter sauce, and expensive perfume. From a distance, the reception looked beautiful enough to belong in a bridal magazine. Up close, it felt cold. Every few minutes, someone glanced toward my table and then quickly looked away again. People always pretend not to notice humiliation when they are afraid it might spread to them too. Claire moved through the room like she owned every inch of it. Guests complimented her dress. Her mother cried dramatically near the dessert table while telling people how proud she was of her daughter. Ryan followed Claire from group to group with the exhausted smile of a man trying very hard to believe he was happy. I wondered if he even realized how much of himself had disappeared over the last 6 years. Before Claire, Ryan used to call me every Sunday morning without fail. We would sit on the phone discussing baseball scores, weather forecasts, grocery prices, ordinary little things that somehow made life feel steady. After Claire entered his life, the calls became shorter, then monthly, then almost non-existent. At first, I blamed adulthood. People grow busy. Lives change. But now I understood something painful. Distance had not happened naturally. It had been carefully built one brick at a time. The maid of honor tapped her champagne glass gently to announce another round of speeches. Claire squeezed Ryan's hand dramatically while guests applauded. "We just want to thank everyone who made this magical day possible," she said sweetly into the microphone. "Especially our amazing friends and family who supported us every step of the way." Her eyes moved around the ballroom slowly, intentionally skipping over me. She thanked her parents for emotional support. She thanked Ryan's college roommate for organizing the bachelor trip to Napa Valley. She thanked bridesmaids, co-workers, cousins, even the wedding florist by name. I sat perfectly still while she thanked nearly every person in the ballroom except the woman who had quietly written checks for the venue deposit, catering bill, and honeymoon suite upgrade. Ryan finally stepped beside her holding his champagne glass awkwardly. "And of course," he added with a nervous laugh, "we appreciate everyone who contributed financially too." Laughter rippled softly through the room. Then one of Ryan's groomsmen shouted from a nearby table, "Yeah, let us all thank the family bank account." More laughter followed. Not loud, not cruel on the surface, just enough to make my face burn beneath the ballroom lights. Claire leaned into the microphone again with a teasing smile. "Well," she said lightly, "at least the older generation is useful for something." This time the laughter came easier. Several people even clapped. I looked down at my untouched dinner plate because suddenly I could not trust my face to remain calm. It amazed me how quickly cruelty becomes acceptable once enough people decide to call it humor. The room blurred slightly for a moment before sharpening again. Across the table, one older couple looked visibly uncomfortable. The woman lowered her eyes while her husband adjusted his tie repeatedly without speaking. But nobody defended me. Nobody said Claire had gone too far. Ryan stood beside his bride smiling weakly while she publicly reduced his widowed mother to a punchline. A few minutes later the band started playing again, and conversations resumed as if nothing important had happened. I reached slowly for my water glass, careful not to let my hand tremble this time. That was when I noticed a young woman standing quietly near the edge of the dance floor watching me with concern. She looked familiar. Soft brown hair, pale blue dress. Ryan's niece Sophie. She could not have been older than 22. Unlike everyone else in that ballroom, she was not pretending this was normal. Our eyes met briefly, and something in her expression shifted from uncertainty to decision. A few moments later, while guests crowded toward the open bar and Claire posed for another round of photographs, Sophie walked carefully toward my table and stopped beside the silver trash can. "Grandma Evelyn," she said softly, almost like she was afraid someone might overhear her kindness. "I do not think this is funny at all." For a second, I could not answer Sophie because kindness felt almost unfamiliar in that ballroom. Her voice was quiet, careful, the way people speak inside hospitals or churches when they know someone has been hurt deeply. I looked up at her and noticed how tightly she held her clutch purse against her chest. She looked nervous standing beside me, as if simply acknowledging my humiliation might make her the next target. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said gently. "You are very kind." Sophie glanced toward the dance floor where Claire was posing for photographs beneath an arch covered in white orchids. "I almost did not come tonight," she admitted softly. "I knew Claire was planning something." My eyes lifted toward her fully then. "You knew?" Sophie nodded once before lowering herself carefully into the empty chair beside me. Around us, the reception continued in waves of artificial joy. A group of bridesmaids laughed loudly near the bar, while waiters carried trays of miniature desserts through the crowd. Nobody paid attention to us. Claire had designed the evening perfectly. Humiliation hidden beneath elegance always makes people uncomfortable enough to stay silent. Sophie leaned closer. "Last week I overheard Claire talking to one of her friends during the rehearsal dinner planning," she whispered. "She said she wanted to put you in your place before the wedding because Ryan still feels guilty about you sometimes." I felt something cold settle quietly in my chest. Not shock anymore. Clarity. Sophie continued carefully, choosing each word with obvious hesitation. "Claire said if she embarrassed you publicly once, you would stop showing up to family events altogether." I stared at the glowing candles arranged across the table between us. Their reflections shimmered against polished silverware and crystal glasses. Everything looked warm from a distance. Up close, the flames only reminded me how easily beautiful things burn. "Out." "I see," I said quietly. Sophie looked upset by how calm I sounded. "Grandma Evelyn, I do not think Ryan understands how cruel she is. Claire changes around him. When he leaves the room, she talks differently. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was amusing, but because I remembered the exact moment I first noticed that same transformation myself. It had been 4 years earlier during Thanksgiving at Ryan and Claire's house. Claire had hugged me tightly at the front door while praising the homemade pies I brought. The second Ryan stepped outside to help a neighbor move a car, her smile vanished completely. She looked at my coat, my shoes, my carefully curled gray hair, and said in a flat voice, "You know, Evelyn, people our age usually prefer more modern holiday traditions. You do not have to force yourself into everything." Then Ryan returned, and Claire immediately wrapped an arm around my shoulders while asking if I wanted more cider. At the time, I convinced myself I was imagining the hostility. Older women are taught to doubt our instincts. We are told we are too sensitive, too emotional, too dramatic. Slowly, over the years, I stopped trusting my own discomfort. Sophie looked down at her folded hands. "There is something else you should know," she said carefully. A slow, uneasy feeling moved through me then. "What is it?" Sophie hesitated long enough that I noticed her breathing change slightly. "Claire and Ryan have been talking about selling your house after the honeymoon." For a moment, the sounds of the ballroom seemed to disappear completely. "Selling my house," I repeated calmly. "Ryan said the property taxes are too expensive for someone your age," Sophie explained softly. "Claire wants you to move into one of those luxury senior living communities outside Phoenix. She said it would simplify everyone's lives." Simplify everyone's lives. I thought about the white colonial house I had lived in for 38 years. The porch swing my late husband built by hand one summer after Ryan graduated high school. The kitchen doorway where pencil marks still measured Ryan's height from childhood birthdays. The garden my husband planted before cancer. Took him 6 years ago. Claire spoke about my life the way people discuss replacing outdated furniture. Sophie's eyes filled with guilt. "I am sorry," she whispered. I did not know if I should tell you. I reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. "No," I said quietly. "You did the right thing." Across the ballroom, Claire laughed loudly while adjusting the diamond bracelet glittering on her wrist. The bracelet I bought her last Christmas after she cried and told Ryan she had never truly felt accepted by his family. Sitting there beside that silver trash can, listening to Sophie reveal plans that had clearly been discussed for months behind my back, I finally understood something painful. Claire had never wanted a mother-in-law. She wanted an obstacle removed. After my conversation with Sophie, I remained seated for another 20 minutes pretending to watch the dancing while my mind quietly rearranged years of memories into something far uglier than I had ever allowed myself to believe. Once you finally see manipulation clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee it. Every conversation from the past few years suddenly sounded different inside my head. Every smile Claire gave me now carried sharp hidden edges I had ignored before. I remembered the afternoon Ryan first brought her to my house, almost 7 years earlier. She arrived carrying an expensive bottle of wine and wearing a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. She hugged me warmly and called me Mom before dessert was even served. At the time, I thought her confidence felt refreshing. After years of Ryan dating distant women who barely tolerated family gatherings, Claire seemed attentive and affectionate. She asked questions about my late husband, complimented my garden, offered to help wash dishes afterward. I remember telling my neighbor Helen the next morning that Ryan had finally found someone who would bring warmth back into his life. Looking back now, I realized Claire studied people before deciding who she needed to become around them. Around Ryan, she acted loving and supportive. Around his co-workers, she became ambitious and polished. Around older relatives, she transformed into the perfect, respectful future daughter-in-law. But when she believed nobody important was watching, the mask slipped. Small moments returned to me one after another while the wedding guests continued celebrating around us. The time Claire convinced Ryan to cancel our annual 4th of July barbecue because she thought my backyard looked dated compared to her friends' homes. The Christmas, she quietly replaced every family ornament I collected over 30 years with matching designer decorations because she said the originals looked cheap. The afternoon she laughed after seeing my old Buick parked beside her luxury SUV and said, "Ryan keeps telling me we should upgrade your life eventually." Upgrade your life. At the time, I forced myself to laugh along because older women are expected to stay agreeable if we want access to our families. We swallowed disrespect in tiny doses until one day we realized we have been slowly disappearing. Sophie remained beside me quietly while guests crowded near the dance floor for another toast. "Grandma Evelyn," she said carefully after a while, "there is one more thing I think you should know." I turned toward her slowly. "What is it?" Sophie glanced around to make sure nobody stood close enough to overhear us. "Claire met with a real estate agent 2 weeks ago. My mother overheard her talking about how much profit they could make from your property once you moved out." My chest tightened slightly, though outwardly I remained calm. "Did Ryan know about this?" Sophie hesitated. That hesitation told me everything before she even answered. "Yes," she admitted softly. "I think he did." For several seconds, I simply watched Ryan across the ballroom while he laughed beside the open bar with 2 college friends. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like a man whose future had already been arranged for him by someone else. I tried to reconcile that image with the little boy who once slept beside my hospital bed for 2 nights after my appendix surgery because he was afraid I might feel lonely waking up alone. Grief comes in strange forms. Sometimes you mourn people who are still alive. "I am sorry," Sophie whispered again. "I did not want to upset you tonight." I looked at her gently. "No, sweetheart," I said quietly. "Tonight did not create the truth. It only revealed it." Near the center of the ballroom, Claire raised her champagne glass while laughing loudly at something one of the bridesmaids said. The diamonds on her wrists sparkled beneath the chandeliers. Suddenly, I remembered exactly where that bracelet came from. 3 Christmases earlier, Claire cried in my kitchen after an argument with Ryan and confessed she had always felt insecure around wealthy women growing up. The next morning, I returned a necklace I had planned to buy myself and purchased the bracelet instead because I wanted her to feel loved by our family. Sitting there beside that silver trash can, I realized something almost unbearable. Every act of generosity I had offered Claire over the years had not softened her resentment toward me. It had only convinced her I was weak enough to use. By the time the wedding cake was served, I no longer felt angry. That surprised me more than anything else. I had expected humiliation to feel explosive, sharp, unbearable. Instead, it settled quietly inside me like winter snow covering a field after a storm. Cold, still, certain. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly, while waiters rolled out the enormous 5-tier cake covered in white frosting flowers. Guests gathered near the dance floor with phones raised high, eager to record another perfect moment for social media. Claire rested one manicured hand against Ryan's chest while smiling brightly for photographs. Looking at them from across the room, nobody would have guessed they had spent the evening publicly humiliating the woman who helped pay for almost every detail surrounding them. That is the strange thing about cruelty. When people wrap it in elegance, others mistake it for sophistication. Sophie touched my arm gently. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. I looked down at my folded napkin before answering. "I think so," I said honestly. And somehow I meant it. Because for the first time in years, I finally stopped blaming myself for the distance growing inside my family. I used to lie awake at night, wondering if I talked too much during visits, if my advice sounded old-fashioned, if my loneliness after Harold died had made me too emotionally dependent on Ryan. Claire encouraged those doubts carefully over time. Whenever I looked hurt after being excluded from something, she would tilt her head sympathetically and say things like, "Evelyn, younger couples just need space," or, "You know Ryan hates guilt." Slowly, I trained myself to ask for less. Fewer visits, fewer phone calls, smaller pieces of my own son's life. I thought I was being respectful, mature, understanding. But sitting beside that silver trash can while guests applauded Claire and Ryan cutting their wedding cake together, I realized something devastating. Love should not require disappearing to make other people comfortable. Ryan glanced toward my table briefly while feeding Claire a bite of cake for the cameras. For half a second, our eyes met across the ballroom. Something flickered across his expression then. Guilt, perhaps, or discomfort. But whatever conscience tried to surface inside him disappeared quickly once Claire laughed and pulled him back toward the crowd surrounding them. I looked away first. Near the entrance, I noticed an older man adjusting his tie while speaking quietly with one of the hotel staff members. Even from a distance, I recognized Harold Green immediately, my late husband's attorney. Harold had been our family lawyer for nearly 30 years. Tall, silver-haired, always calm in the way truly competent people tend to be. He had attended Ryan's graduation party, our anniversary dinners, even Harold's funeral reception after my husband passed away 6 years earlier. I had not expected him at the wedding. Sophie followed my gaze. "Oh," she said softly. Claire looked upset when she saw him arrive earlier. That caught my attention immediately. "Why?" Sophie hesitated. I overheard Claire asking Ryan whether Harold still had copies of all the trust documents connected to your estate. For the first time that evening, something almost resembling amusement stirred quietly inside me. Not because the situation was funny, because suddenly, Claire's confidence made sense. She believed she already understood exactly what belonged to Ryan. The house, the investments, the family trust Harold and I established after my husband's death. Claire had spent years behaving like ownership was only a matter of waiting patiently for older people to step aside. But Claire never handled the legal documents herself. My husband did. And after he died, Harold handled everything quietly through me. Across the ballroom, Claire noticed Harold speaking with hotel staff near the entrance. Even from a distance, I saw her smile tighten slightly before she leaned close to Ryan and whispered something urgently into his ear. Ryan turned immediately toward the entrance, his relaxed expression fading. Watching them together then, I understood something clearly for the very first time. Claire believed power belonged to whoever controlled appearances. But my late husband had spent 42 years building something much stronger than appearances. He built protections. Quiet ones. Legal ones. The kind selfish people rarely notice until it is far too late. I folded my napkin carefully and placed it beside my untouched dessert plate. Then, for the first time all evening, I smiled. The wedding ended close to midnight, but I left long before the final dance. Nobody tried to stop me. Claire was too busy posing beside the floral backdrop, while Ryan laughed with friends near the whiskey bar. Sophie hugged me tightly near the valet station and whispered that she would call me the next day. I thanked her, kissed her cheek, and stepped into the cold October air feeling strangely lighter than when I arrived. The night smelled faintly of rain and fallen leaves. Across the parking lot, luxury cars reflected the soft lights hanging from the country club entrance. For years I had feared losing my family. Driving home alone that night, I realized something important. You cannot lose people who already decided to leave you emotionally long ago. My house greeted me with silence when I walked through the front door just after 1 a.m. Familiar silence. Honest silence. Not the polished artificial kind from the ballroom. I set my purse carefully on the kitchen counter and stood there for a long moment staring at the framed family photographs lining the hallway wall. Ryan at age 8 holding a fishing rod twice his size. Ryan graduating from college while my late husband wrapped an arm proudly around his shoulders. Christmas mornings. Birthday dinners. Summer vacations at Cape Cod before life became complicated and performative. I realized every photograph on those walls captured a version of Ryan that no longer existed. The realization hurt less than I expected. Grief changes shape eventually. After enough disappointment, sadness becomes clarity. I changed into my robe, made chamomile tea, and carried the steaming mug into my late husband's study. The room still smelled faintly of cedarwood and old paper even after 6 years without him. His reading glasses remained exactly where he left them, beside a stack of financial journals. Some people thought it was unhealthy that I never redecorated the room after he passed away. Claire certainly did. "You should modernize the house eventually," she once told me while casually flipping through design magazines at my dining room table. Nobody wants to live in a museum. But Harold's study never felt like a museum to me. It felt like evidence that loyalty once existed inside my life. I sat slowly in the leather chair beside the window and opened the bottom drawer of Harold's desk. Inside rested several neatly organized folders exactly where he always kept them. Insurance documents, property records, investment statements, and beneath them, a dark blue folder labeled Family Trust. I stared at it quietly while rain finally began tapping softly against the windows outside. Harold handled most of our financial planning during the last years of my husband's illness because neither of us trusted Ryan to manage large responsibilities emotionally. Back then, Ryan was grieving, impulsive, easily influenced. My husband noticed it long before I did. "Ryan has a good heart," he once told me during chemotherapy treatments, "but good hearts are dangerous when attached to weak spines." At the time, I defended our son fiercely. Tonight, sitting alone inside that quiet study while thunder rolled softly in. The distance, I finally admitted Harold had been right. My phone buzzed suddenly against the desk. A text from Ryan. Hope you made it home safe. Sorry if Claire's joke upset you tonight. You know how she is sometimes. I read the message twice before setting the phone face down without answering. That single sentence told me everything I needed to know. Not I am sorry. Not are you okay. Just another excuse wrapped carefully around Claire's behavior, like decorative paper covering something rotten underneath. You know how she is sometimes. Yes, I finally did. I opened the blue folder slowly and began reading through documents I had not looked at in nearly 3 years. Trust agreements, property clauses, investment protections, signatures, legal instructions written carefully by my late husband and reviewed personally by Harold Green. Outside, rain continued falling steadily against the windows while the house settled quietly around me. By the time I finished reading the final page nearly an hour later, my tea had gone cold beside the desk. But for the first time in years, my hands were perfectly steady. Because Claire believed she understood exactly how powerless older women become once their families stop respecting them. What she did not understand yet was this. Harold spent 42 years making sure I would never need anyone's permission to survive. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my kitchen floor as if nothing in my life had changed overnight. Birds gathered outside near the hydrangea bushes Harold planted 15 years earlier, and somewhere down the street a lawn mower hummed steadily through the crisp autumn air. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary light. It amazed me how peaceful the world could remain while something fundamental inside you finally shifted forever. I slept better that night than I had in years. No anxiety. No replaying conversations in my head searching for mistakes I might have made. No wondering whether I was asking too much from my own family simply by wanting to feel included. Clarity is a strange kind of freedom. Around 10 that morning, my phone rang. Claire's name flashed brightly across the screen. I let it ring 4 times before. Answering. Good morning, Evelyn, Claire said in that polished, cheerful tone she used whenever she wanted something. I hope you are recovering from all the excitement yesterday. Recovering. As though humiliation were simply exhaustion from a long party. I am doing fine, I replied calmly. Claire paused briefly, probably expecting more emotion from me. Wonderful, she continued smoothly. Ryan and I were actually hoping we could stop by sometime this week to discuss a few future plans with you. Future plans. I almost smiled into my coffee cup. What kind of plans? Nothing stressful, Claire said quickly. Just practical things. Newly married couples need to think ahead, you know? Finances, housing, family logistics. There it was beneath the surface already. Not grief over hurting me. Not embarrassment over the wedding. Logistics. Thursday evening works for me, I said quietly. Claire sounded relieved immediately. Perfect. Oh, and Ryan wanted me to tell you not to dwell on that silly joke from yesterday. Everyone thought it was harmless. Everyone. Such a useful word when people want to hide behind crowds instead of accountability. Of course, I answered gently. I would never want to make anyone uncomfortable. After we hung up, I carried my coffee into Harold's study again and dialed Harold Green's office number from memory. He answered personally on the second ring. Evelyn, he said warmly. I was hoping you would call. I looked around the quiet study while sunlight touched the edges of old bookshelves and framed photographs. You noticed the seating arrangement too? I asked dryly. Harold sighed softly. Claire has never understood the difference between confidence and cruelty. I leaned back slowly in the leather chair. I think she believes Ryan already owns everything. A brief silence followed before Harold answered carefully. That assumption may become very uncomfortable for her. We spent nearly an hour reviewing documents together over speakerphone. Trust clauses, property protections, transfer conditions Harold and I established after my husband's death. Listening to Harold explain everything calmly felt almost surreal because Claire and Ryan had spent years behaving as though my future depended entirely on their generosity. In reality, my husband had protected me so thoroughly that neither of them could touch the house, investment accounts, or trust distributions without my direct approval. Even the wedding money Claire treated like an entitlement had technically been structured as a documented family loan. Harold explained each detail patiently while I took notes beside the window. By the time the conversation ended, my pulse remained perfectly steady. Would you like me present Thursday evening? Harold asked finally. I thought about Claire's satisfied smile inside the ballroom, the silver trash can beside my chair, Ryan laughing nervously while strangers mocked me openly. Then I thought about the text message he sent afterward. Hope you made it home safe. Sorry if Claire's joke upset you. Not love, not remorse, just avoidance wrapped in politeness. Yes, I said quietly. I think that would be wise. After the call ended, I walked slowly through my house for nearly an hour. The living room Harold painted himself one rainy weekend 20 years earlier. The kitchen where Ryan learned fractions while helping me bake apple pies after school. The hallway where pencil marks still climbed the wall recording his childhood height year after year. Claire saw square footage and resale value when she looked at this house. She never understood she was standing inside the physical remains of an entire lifetime. Around sunset, I opened the drawer beside my dining room table and removed the wedding place card I brought home accidentally the night before. Evelyn Whitmore. The corners were slightly bent now. I stared at it for a long moment before placing it carefully beside the blue trust folder on the table. Then, for the first time since Harold died, I stopped feeling afraid of being left alone. Thursday evening arrived with steady rain tapping softly against the windows while I set the dining room table for 4 people. White plates, linen napkins, silverware polished carefully that afternoon while jazz music played quietly through the kitchen speakers. For years I prepared family dinners hoping warmth might somehow repair the growing distance between Ryan and me. Tonight, for the first time, I prepared the table without hope at all. Oddly enough, that made me calmer. Harold Green arrived 15 minutes early carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the same charcoal gray overcoat he had owned for at least a decade. You look rested, he observed gently after I let him inside. I smiled faintly. I finally stopped apologizing to myself for other people's behavior. Harold nodded once like a man hearing something he already understood deeply. At exactly 6:30, headlights swept across the front windows. Claire and Ryan stepped inside moments later carrying a bottle of expensive wine neither of them expected me to keep. Claire kissed the air near my cheek, while Ryan offered me an awkward side hug that felt more like obligation than affection. "Mom," he said carefully, "you did not have to make dinner for us." I looked at him calmly. "Actually, Ryan, I did." Claire noticed Harold immediately standing near the dining room entrance. For the first time since I met her, genuine uncertainty crossed her face before she quickly replaced it with a smile. "Oh," she said brightly, though her voice tightened slightly. "I did not realize this was a legal meeting." Harold adjusted his glasses calmly. "That depends entirely on how the evening unfolds." Dinner itself passed almost politely. Claire complimented the roast chicken while carefully avoiding eye contact with Harold. Ryan discussed honeymoon plans in Hawaii and complained mildly about airline delays. I listened quietly while pouring iced tea into crystal glasses that once belonged to my mother. Watching them sit comfortably inside the house they had already discussed selling behind my back no longer hurt the way it once would have. Some betrayals become easier to survive the moment you stop expecting remorse. Eventually, Claire set down her wine glass and folded her hands together with rehearsed gentleness. "Evelyn," she began carefully, "Ryan and I have been thinking a lot about your future lately." "My future?" Not once had she asked what I wanted for it. "How thoughtful," I replied softly. Claire smiled. "Encouraged. We just worry this house is becoming too much responsibility for you alone. Property taxes, maintenance, stairs. You deserve somewhere easier. Somewhere with support." Ryan nodded quickly beside her. "There are some really beautiful senior communities now, Mom. Golf courses, fitness centers, social activities. Social activities. As though loneliness could be solved with bingo nights and scheduled bus trips." I looked at Ryan quietly for several seconds before speaking. "And what would happen to this house?" Claire answered before he could. "Well, obviously selling it would free up a tremendous amount of equity for everyone to manage more efficiently." Everyone. There was that word again. I reached calmly beneath the dining table and lifted the dark blue folder onto the polished wood surface between us. The room grew still immediately. Harold opened his briefcase beside me while Claire's smile began fading around the edges. "Actually," I said quietly, "Harold and I spent the last few days reviewing the estate documents your father established before he died." Ryan frowned slightly. "What does that have to do with anything?" Harold slid several neatly organized papers across the table toward them. "Quite a lot, actually." Claire picked up the first document quickly while Ryan leaned closer beside her. I watched the color slowly drain from her face line by line. "This cannot be right," she whispered finally. Harold's tone remained perfectly calm. "The Whitmore residence is protected under an irrevocable trust solely controlled by Mrs. Whitmore during her lifetime. It cannot be sold, transferred, or leveraged without her direct authorization." Ryan blinked repeatedly while scanning the pages. "Wait," he said slowly. "I thought Dad left the property to me eventually." "Eventually," Harold clarified, "under specific behavioral and financial conditions outlined by your father." Silence settled heavily across the dining room then. Rain tapped softly against the windows while Claire turned another page with visibly trembling fingers. "And regarding the wedding expenses," Harold continued smoothly, "those funds were legally structured as a documented family loan requiring repayment should evidence of elder coercion, financial manipulation, or public humiliation emerge." Claire looked up sharply at me then. For the first time since the wedding, she looked genuinely afraid. I folded my hands carefully beside the blue folder and held her gaze steadily. "You replaced my seat with a trash can," I said softly. "Tonight, I simply returned everyone to the place they chose for me."